At 19 years old, my own father made me a prisoner inside our home. He gave me a bitter tea every night and said it was medicine. For 2 years, my body was destroying itself from the inside while he charged admission for his friends to come watch me suffer. When my skin started tearing open, I knew. Either I escaped that night, or I died in that bed. Good afternoon, my dear ones watching me right now. It's so good to have you here with me in this moment. My name is Margaret Thompson, and I'm 74 years old, thanks to the good Lord who allowed me to get this far. I was born and still live here in Asheville, a small town in the mountains of North Carolina, you know? That Blue Ridge region, where the morning mist rolls through the valleys and the mountains seem to embrace you from all sides. Before I continue my story, I want to make a special request to those of you watching now. Tell me here in the comments, from what corner of America or the world are you listening to me? And what time of day did you find this video from Grandma here? Are you having an afternoon coffee like me? Or is it already evening where you are? I read every comment, you know, each and every one. And I'm so happy to know I'm not alone, that there are people on the other side listening to me. So tell me, will you? Where are you from, and what time is it there? Let's create a chain of kindness here in the comments. The story I'm going to tell today is heavy, my children. It's a story I kept inside me for many years that I was ashamed to tell, that I thought was my fault. But today I know it wasn't. Today I know I was the victim of a monster who should have protected me. I'm going to talk about what my own father did to me when I was a 19-year-old girl. I'll talk about how he kept me prisoner inside my own home, how he destroyed my body and soul for money. And I'll talk about how I managed to escape, about the angel God placed in my path when I was almost dying. Grab a cup of coffee, my child. Sit here with me. Because this story is long, but it's important. It's important for me to tell, and maybe it's important for someone going through something similar to hear. Because if I survived, you can survive too. It all started back in my childhood, in this same Asheville that brings me so much peace today. My childhood, my dear ones, was a strange thing. On the outside, it looked like a normal family. On the inside, there was something wrong that I only understood much later. My father's name was Eugene Thompson. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and a thick mustache he made a point to trim every Sunday morning. He worked as a tobacco broker here in the region, buying crops from small farmers and reselling to the big buyers who came from Charlotte and Raleigh. He earned well when he wanted to work, but the problem was he preferred easy money. He played poker almost every night at Pete's bar, bet on cockfights on weekends, and when he lost, he came home with the devil in his body. My mother was Ruth, a tiny woman with brown eyes always cast down who seemed afraid of her own shadow. She had been a pretty girl I saw in the old photos she kept in a shoebox under the bed. But life with my father was erasing that beauty, bending her back, stealing the light from her eyes. Mama spent her days in the kitchen, at the wash basin doing laundry, sweeping the yard. She spoke little, smiled even less. When my father came home, she practically disappeared, became invisible. I grew up thinking that's how a wife had to be. I was an only child. Mama told me once, very quietly so Daddy wouldn't hear, that she had lost 3 babies before me. After I was born, she never got pregnant again. I think her body simply gave up. Or maybe she found a way not to have more children so as not to bring more kids into that house. I'll never know. Our house was on a dirt road near the French Broad River. It was an old construction with whitewashed walls that my mother repainted every year before Easter. It had 3 rooms, the living room combined with the kitchen, my parents' bedroom, and a small room in the back that was mine. The bathroom was outside, a wooden outhouse. We bathed in a tub, water heated on the wood stove. The backyard was big, full of fruit trees my grandfather had planted before he died. There was an apple tree, a peach tree, a cherry tree, a pear tree that gave fruit so sweet you could eat them down to the core. It was in the backyard that I spent most of my time, escaping the heavy atmosphere inside the house. I climbed the trees, talked to the chickens, invented games by myself because my father didn't like me bringing other children onto the property. It wasn't always like that, I can't lie. There were days my father woke up in a good mood, gave me a quarter to buy candy at the store, called me little girl. On those days, Mama even smiled a little. The house seemed to breathe relieved. But those days were rare, my children. Most of the time, we lived walking on eggshells, trying not to make noise, not to contradict, not to exist too much. At school, I was a quiet girl. I sat in the back of the classroom, did my homework properly, didn't raise my hand to answer the teacher's questions, even when I knew the answer. The other children thought I was weird because I could never go play at their houses, could never stay after school, could never participate in birthday parties. My father didn't allow it. He said a woman's place was inside the home, that I didn't need any friends, that family was all that mattered. I had one classmate, Betty, the shoemaker's daughter. We talked during recess, hidden under the oak tree in the schoolyard. She told me about her life, about her rowdy siblings, about her mother who sang while cooking, about her father who took her fishing on Sundays. I listened silently, with a tightness in my chest I couldn't explain. Why was her house so different from mine? Why did her mother smile and mine cried in secret? When I was about 10 years old, I started noticing strange things. My father looked at me differently. It wasn't a father's look anymore, you know? It was a look that made me want to hide, cover myself, disappear. He started making comments about my changing body, said I was becoming a woman, that I needed to be careful with the men out there because they were all dangerous. The irony, my dear ones. The most dangerous man in my life slept in the room next door. Mama must have noticed something because she started keeping me always close, always under her wing. When my father arrived, she sent me to the backyard, to my room, anywhere away from him. She never said anything directly, never explained anything to me. But that mother's instinct, that fear in her eyes when he looked at me, said everything. The years passed, and the tension inside the house grew. My father became more controlling, more possessive. He didn't let me go out for anything, not even to church with Mama. He said I had to stay home, that the world out there was too dangerous for a pretty girl like me. I became more and more isolated, lost contact with Betty, with the other girls from school. When I finished elementary school, my father didn't let me continue studying. He said women didn't need education, that my place was at home learning to be a housewife. I was 13 years old when I stopped studying, 13 years old and already condemned to live locked in that house, washing, cooking, cleaning, obeying. Mama tried to argue once, asked him to at least let me go to middle school. He slapped her so hard she fell to the floor. She never opened her mouth to defend me again. And so the years of my adolescence passed, my dear ones. I grew up in that prison disguised as a home, seeing the world through the window, dreaming of a freedom that seemed increasingly impossible. I didn't know it, but the worst was yet to come. The real nightmare began when I turned 19, on a June night I'll never be able to forget, June 1970. I remember it like it was yesterday. I had just turned 19, 3 days before. Mama had made a pound cake with vanilla, my favorite, and we ate it hidden in the kitchen while my father was out gambling. It was the last moment of sweetness I had for a very, very long time. That June night, it was terribly cold. That mountain cold that gets into your bones, you know? I was in my little back room, under a thick patchwork quilt Mama had made, trying to sleep. The house was silent. Mama had already gone to bed, and my father hadn't come home from the poker game yet. I must have fallen asleep because I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door opening. At first, I thought it was Mama coming to check on me. She did that sometimes. But when I opened my eyes, I saw my father's silhouette against the dim light coming from the hallway. He was standing in the doorway looking at me. The smell of whiskey reached me before he even approached. My dear ones, I won't describe what happened that night. Some things are too heavy to put into words, and I promised myself I wouldn't relive that in detail. What I can say is, that night, the man who should protect me, who should be my safe harbor, destroyed a part of me I could never recover. He said I was his property, that he had raised me and could do whatever he wanted with me. He said if I told anyone, nobody would believe me, and he would kill Mama in front of me. When he left the room, I was paralyzed. I couldn't cry, couldn't scream, couldn't move. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling my body as if it belonged to someone else. I think a part of my mind simply shut down that night, as protection. Because if I had felt all that pain at once, I think I would have died right there. The next day, Mama noticed something was wrong. I couldn't look at her, couldn't speak. She came to me, held my hand, and asked quietly what had happened. When I started to tell, she covered my mouth with her hand, her eyes full of tears and fear. "Don't say that, my daughter. Don't ever say that. He'll kill you, kill me, kill us both." And that was it. My own mother, the person who should protect me above all, chose silence. She chose her survival over mine. That wasn't the only night. My father started entering my room regularly, always when he came home drunk, always with the same threats. I tried to lock the door, but he ripped out the lock. I tried to sleep in the living room. He dragged me back to the bedroom. I tried to run away once, ran to the backyard in the middle of the night. He caught me before I reached the gate and beat me so badly I couldn't get up for 3 days. Mama saw everything, heard everything, and did nothing. She cried in secret, prayed the rosary quietly, looked at me with infinite sadness in her eyes, but never, never confronted him. The fear she had of that man was greater than anything else. Sometimes I felt anger toward her, a huge anger that consumed me inside. Other times, I felt pity, because I saw that she was also a prisoner, also a victim, except she had chosen to bow down, and I was being broken by force. About 3 months later, my body started to change. I felt nauseous in the morning, my breasts hurt, my period didn't come. At first, I didn't want to accept it, didn't even want to think about the possibility. But when my belly started to show, there was no more denying it. I was expecting a child from my own father. When he found out, my dear ones, I thought he was going to kill me. I thought he'd beat me until I lost the child, or throw me out of the house. But his reaction was worse than anything I could have imagined. He smiled with that mouth rotten with whiskey and evil, and said I was going to make a lot of money for him. That same week, he started giving me a tea every night, a dark, bitter liquid that he forced me to drink to the last drop. He said it was vitamins for the baby, that it would make the child strong and healthy. I didn't believe him, of course. But what could I do? If I refused, he beat me. If I threw it away in secret, he stayed beside me watching me drink. So I drank, every single day, that horrible thing that went down burning my throat. Time passed, and my belly grew. But there was something wrong. I felt it. The belly grew too much, too fast. And the baby didn't move. In the beginning of a pregnancy, it's normal not to feel anything, I know. But many months had passed, and nothing. No little kicks, no movement. It was as if I were carrying a stone inside me instead of a life. My father didn't let me leave the house for anything, not even to go to the backyard. He was afraid the neighbors would see my growing belly, that they'd start asking questions. So I stayed all day locked in the room, lying in bed, drinking that cursed tea, and feeling my body become heavier and heavier, stranger and stranger. Mama sometimes sat beside my bed and stayed there in silence, holding my hand. I saw that she wanted to say something, wanted to ask for forgiveness, perhaps, or give me some comfort. But the words never came out. We just stayed there, 2 women destroyed by the same man, trapped in the same house, sinking together in a silence that hurt more than any scream. 9 months passed, 10 months, 11 months, and the baby didn't come. My belly kept growing, bigger and bigger, heavier and heavier. The skin was so stretched I was afraid to breathe too deeply. Thick, purple stretch marks cut across my belly like wounds. And that tea, that cursed tea, I kept drinking every night because my father forced me. That's when the whole thing took a turn I could never have imagined. When the pregnancy passed a year, my father looked at my enormous belly and saw an opportunity to make money. My dear ones, what I'm going to tell you now is the darkest part of my story. It's hard to put into words what I lived through those months, but I need to tell. I need you to understand how far human evil can go when it finds fertile ground in greed and lack of character. Prepare your hearts, because mine still aches when I remember these things. When my pregnancy passed a year without the baby being born, my father realized something special was happening. Special for him, of course, because for me, it was a nightmare that had no end, an agony that dragged on day after day, night after night. My belly was already enormous, the size of one of those exercise balls you see nowadays at gyms. I could barely get out of bed, could barely breathe properly. The weight was so much that my back hurt all the time, a constant, throbbing pain that gave me no rest day or night. I slept in strange positions, always on my side, with pillows supporting that monstrous belly, and even so, I woke up several times with cramps, short of breath, with the feeling I was being crushed from the inside. My father started telling his poker friends about my condition. On card nights, between one round and another of whiskey, he bragged, "You guys won't believe what's happening in my house. My daughter's been pregnant for over a year, and her belly won't stop growing. It's something out of this world." The men didn't believe it, thought he was making up a story to impress, to have something to talk about. They laughed at him, said it was drunk talk. That's when he had the cruelest idea that sick mind could conceive. One Saturday night, I was in my room as always, lying on my side because I couldn't lie on my back anymore. The weight was unbearable. The lamplight made strange shadows on the wall, and I stared at them, trying to find shapes, trying to distract my mind from the pain. I heard voices in the living room, rough men's laughter, the sound of glasses hitting the wooden table. I thought it was just another night of cards and whiskey, like so many others. I closed my eyes and tried to pretend I didn't exist, that I was somewhere else, far from there. But then my bedroom door opened with that creak I knew so well, and my father entered, followed by 3 men I'd never seen in my life. The smell of sweat, smoke, and alcohol invaded the room along with them. My heart raced, my hands started trembling. "See? Didn't I tell you? Look at the size of that belly." My father's voice was full of pride, as if he were showing off a trophy, an achievement. The men approached the bed, their eyes wide with amazement, mouths open. One of them, a fat guy in a sweaty shirt, extended his hand and touched my belly without asking permission, as if I were an animal on display at a county fair. I wanted to scream, wanted to send everyone away, wanted to disappear from there. But my father gave me that look I knew all too well. The look that said, "Stay quiet or you'll regret it." The look that promised pain if I dared open my mouth. That night, my father charged $50 from each of those men just to see me. $50 to enter my room, look at my belly, make comments about my body as if I wasn't there, as if I didn't have ears, as if I wasn't human. And that, my dear ones, was just the beginning of a hell that lasted many months. The news spread like wildfire among my father's acquaintances. Every weekend, he brought different people to the house. Men from the poker games, workers from the tobacco warehouse where he did business, people from Pete's bar, folks I'd never seen and who never should have seen me that way. Each one paid their admission to see the phenomenon, as they called me. Some said the freak, others the miracle. None of them saw me as human. My father set up a kind of macabre spectacle inside our house. He made me lie with my belly exposed, lifted my nightgown up to my chest without any shame, and the men entered in groups of 3 or 4, stood there looking, pointing, making jokes among themselves. Some brought friends from other towns, curious people who came from far away just to see it with their own eyes. "Think there's 2 in there?" asked one. "Or 3, responded another, laughing. "I bet $50 it's a monster, a 2-headed creature." The laughter echoed in my small room, mixed with the smoke from the cigarettes they smoked right there, not caring if I could breathe or not. The air became heavy, unbreathable. Some were bolder, wanted to touch, squeeze, poke my hard belly. One of them once put his ear against it to try to hear something. My father allowed everything, as long as they paid a little more. I was merchandise, my children. A freak show attraction inside my own home, in the room where I should be safe. And Mama? Mama stayed in the kitchen during these visits. I heard her washing dishes, stirring pots, pretending nothing was happening on the other side of that thin wall. Sometimes I heard a muffled sob, a contained cry she tried to hide. But she never entered the room to defend me, never sent those men away, never confronted my father, never said enough, never shouted that it was wrong. She was as much a prisoner as I was, except her bars were made of fear, not walls. I don't know what's worse, being trapped unable to escape, or being free to escape and choosing to stay. Time passed slowly, each day an eternity. 1 year and 2 months pregnant, 1 year and 4 months, 1 year and a half. My belly kept growing, fed by that cursed tea my father forced me to drink every night without fail. The skin was so stretched it shone in the dim lamplight, so thin I could see the blue veins underneath, like rivers on a map. The stretch marks had turned into open wounds, purple and red cracks that burned when I moved, that bled when the skin stretched too much. I looked ready to explode at any moment, like an overripe fruit on the tree. I couldn't walk anymore, couldn't sit anymore, couldn't do anything by myself. I stayed all day lying in that bed, looking at the ceiling, counting the water stains, trying not to think about what my life had become. My father brought me food twice a day, always accompanied by the bitter tea. If I didn't eat everything, he yelled. If I didn't drink to the last drop, he grabbed my chin with force, opened my mouth by force, and poured the liquid down my throat while I gagged and cried. I had no choice in anything. Not even what went into my own body did I have control over. It was as if I had ceased to exist as a person. The worst of all was the loneliness, my dear ones. I didn't talk to anyone besides my father and mother. Hadn't seen the sun in months, didn't feel the wind on my face, didn't hear the birds in the backyard that I loved so much when I was a child. My world had been reduced to that stuffy little room, 12 by 12 feet, with the windows always closed and the curtains always drawn so nobody from outside could see. Sometimes I thought I was really going crazy. I talked to myself, answered voices that didn't exist, cried for no reason, and laughed without joy. I had horrible nightmares even while awake, saw shadows moving in the corners, heard whispers coming from nowhere. The human mind wasn't made to live like this, locked up, isolated, treated like livestock. There was one night I tried to ask for help, gathered all the courage that still remained inside me. One of the men who came to see me seemed different from the others. Younger, maybe 25 years old, with kinder eyes and a quiet manner. While the others laughed loudly and made cruel jokes, he stayed quiet in the corner of the room, looking at me with something that seemed like pity or maybe shame for being there. When my father left the room to get more whiskey from the kitchen, I gathered all the strength I had left, turned my head toward him, and whispered with a trembling voice, "Mister, help me, please. Get me out of here. I'm going to die." The young man's eyes widened. He looked at the door with fear, looked back at me. I saw him swallow hard, saw the doubt on his face. For 1 second, a single second that seemed to last an hour, I thought he was going to do something. That he would extend his hand, take me away, call the police, anything. Hope lit up in my chest like a weak candle. But then my father's footsteps returned down the hallway, and the young man lowered his head, stuck his hands in his pockets, and left the room along with the others, without looking back. The candle went out. He never came back, never told anyone, at least not that I know of. One more person who chose silence. After that night, my father noticed something different about me. Maybe he saw the hope in my eyes. Maybe he suspected something. He doubled the surveillance. He started locking the bedroom door from the outside with a heavy padlock when he left Mama as a sentinel in the hallway when he couldn't be home. I was a prisoner in every sense of the word. Without hope, without exit, without voice, without anyone in the world who cared enough to save me. I started accepting that I was going to die there, in that bed, in that room. That my body would split in half and nobody would do anything. The pregnancy reached 1 year and 8 months. 1 year and 10 months. My body no longer seemed like mine. It was a strange, deformed, alien thing that I didn't recognize when I looked down. The belly was so big and so hard, it seemed made of real stone. I felt constant pains, sharp stabs that came and went without warning, an unbearable pressure from inside that made me see stars and bite the pillow so I wouldn't scream. But the baby continued without moving. No kicks, no hiccups, no movement, no sign of life in there. It was like carrying death inside me, a tomb in place of a cradle. My father didn't care about my suffering. For him, the bigger the belly, the better the show, the more people wanted to see, the more money he made. It got to a point where he advertised on the street, invited strangers at the bar, promised nature's greatest spectacle for only $50 admission. The house was always full on weekends, men coming and going at any hour, money changing hands, smoke and laughter, and me there, in the middle of it all, more object than person, more thing than daughter. 2 years. When my pregnancy completed 2 full years, I had lost count of how many men had entered that room to see me. Dozens? Hundreds? I honestly don't know. The faces mixed in my memory, all the same in morbid curiosity, all the same in lack of humanity, all silent accomplices to my suffering. None of them called for help. None of them questioned. None of them saw me as human. And my body, my dear ones, my body was reaching the limit of what it could take. The skin of my belly started making a strange sound in the last days, a low and frightening crack, like old fabric tearing slowly, like stitching bursting thread by thread. I knew something very bad was about to happen. I felt in the depths of my soul that my time was running out. I just didn't know that would be, at the same time, the worst and best moment of my life. The moment when I would finally take my destiny into my own hands. That September afternoon in 1972, my dear ones, was etched in my memory like a hot iron brand's cattle leather. Some dates we forget with time, but not this one. This one I'll carry with me until the day God calls me. It was a Tuesday, I remember, because on Tuesdays my father always went to the bar earlier, said there was a poker game for big money and he couldn't miss it. He left around 2 in the afternoon, all excited, whistling a tune while counting the crumpled bills he'd collected from the visits the previous weekend. I heard him talking to Mama in the kitchen, his voice full of that rotten joy that made me nauseous. This week was good, Ruth. People are talking all over town. Next Sunday, there'll be even more people wanting to see. Before leaving, he entered my room with the cup of tea. He stood at the door looking at me with that crooked smile, then approached and shoved the cup in my hand. Drink it all, Margaret. To the last drop. You know what happens if you don't. I drank. I swallowed that bitter liquid that went down burning while he stood there, eyes fixed on me, checking. When I finished, he took the cup, left the room and locked the door from the outside with the padlock. I heard his footsteps moving away down the hallway, the front door slamming, and then silence. Mama was in the kitchen, but I knew she'd go to sleep soon too. My father had started giving her pills too, a few months ago. He said it was to calm her nerves, to make her stop crying so much, to help her sleep properly. Actually, I knew it was so she wouldn't cause trouble, so she wouldn't think too much, so she wouldn't have the courage to do anything. Mama lived in a state of constant drowsiness in those days. Eyes always half closed, slow movements, slurred voice. It was as if she had given up on really living and only existed halfway. Around 4 in the afternoon, the house fell into total silence. I heard Mama go to her room, the creak of the old bed when she lay down, and then nothing more. Just the wind hitting my closed window, the distant song of a mockingbird in the backyard, and my own racing heart inside my chest. I was restless that day, more than usual. There was something in the air, a strange feeling I couldn't explain, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I was lying on my side, as always, hugging an old pillow, trying to find a position that hurt less. But that day the pain was different from everything I'd felt before. It wasn't the usual dull pain, that constant pressure I'd already gotten used to living with. It was a sharp, pointed, cutting pain that came in waves increasingly stronger and closer together. It felt like there was something alive inside me, trying to get out by force, tearing a path through my flesh. I squeezed the pillow and bit the sheet so I wouldn't scream, because screaming didn't help anything. It never had. Nobody came when I screamed. Nobody cared. That's when I heard the sound. The sound that changed everything. It wasn't loud, my dear ones. It was a low sound, almost like a whisper, a dry crack, short, then another and another, like when you tear an old cloth slowly, thread by thread, stitch by stitch, or like when an old guitar string snaps from too much tension. I stayed still, not breathing, trying to understand where that sound was coming from. And then I realized it was coming from me. It was coming from my belly. I looked down at my monstrous belly that didn't even seem part of my body anymore, and saw something that froze the blood in my veins, that made me forget all the pain for a second of pure terror. A red line was forming in the middle of my belly, thin at first, like a red pen mark on the stretched skin. But as I watched, unable to look away, the line kept opening, widening, and blood started to spring from there. Slowly at first, just a few drops, then faster, more abundant, running down the sides of my belly and soaking the sheet under me. My skin was opening, my dear ones. My body was tearing from the inside out, like an overripe fruit that can't handle the weight of its own pit anymore, like old stitching that finally gives way after so much stretching. The smell of blood filled the room, that metallic smell, strong, that I never forgot. I looked at that wound opening in me and couldn't process what was happening. It seemed like a nightmare, one more of the many nightmares I had in that room. But the pain was too real. The warm blood running was too real. In that moment, my dear ones, I knew with all the certainty in the world, with a clarity that cut through fear and despair, if I stayed there, I was going to die. It wasn't a matter of days or weeks or months anymore. It was a matter of hours, maybe minutes. My body had reached the absolute limit of what it could bear, and now it was destroying itself, falling apart, giving up on keeping me alive. And nobody was going to save me. My father was at the bar celebrating the dirty money he'd made at my expense. My mother was drugged in her room, sunk in a chemical sleep, too far to hear anything, too far to care. I was completely, absolutely, terribly alone. A voice inside me, a voice I thought had died a long time ago, suffocated by 2 years of horror and humiliation, whispered with a strength that surprised me. "Get up, Margaret. Get up or die. You didn't get this far to die in this filthy bed, in this cursed room, in this monster's house. Get up." I cried, my children. I cried from fear, from pain, from despair, from anger, from everything mixed together. Tears ran down my face and mixed with the cold sweat covering my skin. I looked at the ceiling of that room that had been my prison, that water-stained ceiling I knew every inch of from so much looking, and spoke to God for the first time in a very, very long time. I spoke quietly, with a choked voice, trembling. Lord, if you exist, if you still remember me in the midst of so much suffering, give me strength. Give me strength to get out of here. I don't want to die in this bed, in this room, in this house. I don't want this to be my story, this to be my end. I want to live, Lord. Even after everything, I still want to live. Please, please. I don't know if it was God who heard me, my dear ones. I don't know if it was survival instinct, that primitive force that exists inside every living being. I don't know if it was the last spark of hope that still remained in me, hidden in a little corner of my soul that my father hadn't managed to destroy. But something made me move. Something gave me strength to do what I thought was impossible. I rolled to the side of the bed, slowly, inch by inch, feeling each movement pull on that wound opening in my belly. The pain was unbearable, something I have no words to describe, that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. It was like being torn in half with bare hands. But I continued. I bit the sheet so hard I tasted blood in my mouth, but I continued. I put my feet on the cold cement floor. It had been months, many months, since I'd stood up. My legs trembled so much I could barely feel them, weak, skeletal, atrophied. I leaned against the whitewashed wall, leaving a blood-stained handprint on the white, and I stood up. The world spun around me. I saw black dots dancing in front of me. But I stayed on my feet. I stayed standing, holding my belly with both hands, trying to keep that wound closed with the pressure of my fingers. Blood ran between my fingers, warm, sticky, bright red. The door was locked from the outside with the padlock, I knew. But the window of my room faced the back of the house, the backyard where I played when I was a child. My father had nailed some boards on it a long time ago, so nobody could see from outside, so I couldn't look at the world. But the boards were old, termite-eaten, rotten. I dragged myself there, each step an indescribable agony, leaving a red trail on the floor, and I pushed. I pushed with my shoulder, with the little strength I had left, with all the will to live that I had. The wood groaned, resisted for a second, and then gave way with a crack. The boards fell to the outside, and the fresh afternoon air entered the room for the first time in almost 2 years. I cried again, but this time it was from relief, from joy, from hope. The smell of grass, of trees, of leaves, of damp earth, the smell of freedom. I had forgotten what it was like to breathe clean air, air that didn't smell of mold and despair. I felt the wind touch my face, and it was like a kiss from God, a promise that I was going to make it. I dragged myself through the window, pulled out the wood splinters that caught on my nightgown soaked with blood, and fell outside. I rolled on the dirt ground of the backyard, felt the pebbles and dry leaves against my skin. The pain was so much I saw everything blurred, saw stars and colored spots in the middle of the sunny afternoon. But I didn't stop, couldn't stop. If I stopped, I died there, in the backyard of my own house, a few feet from the bed where I'd been a prisoner for 2 full years. I crawled through the backyard, sometimes on hands and knees, sometimes pulling myself with my arms, passing under the trees my grandfather had planted decades ago, those same trees where I played hide-and-seek when I was an innocent girl. The apple tree with its thick, twisted trunk, the peach tree from where I stole green fruits, the cherry tree that turned black with so much fruit in July. They saw me grow up, saw me suffer, and now saw me flee. It seemed like they were rooting for me, extending their branches to give me shade, to protect me. I reached the back gate, that old wooden gate that creaked every time it opened. My hand trembled so much I could barely lift my arm. I pushed the gate with my shoulder. It was unlocked. Thank God, thank all the saints it was unlocked. My father must have forgotten to lock it before leaving, or maybe God made him forget. I prefer to believe the second option. I went out to the dirt road, that same road where I walked hand in hand with Mama when I was little, where I ran barefoot chasing chickens, where I thought life would be simple and happy forever. The afternoon sun blinded me for an instant, too strong after so long in the gloom of that room. I squeezed my eyes, raised a hand to make shade, and looked around, desperate, searching for help. Most of the houses seemed empty at that hour, people still at work, in the fields, in their daily labor. The silence of the street was almost frightening. But one house had lights on. A single house, right across from ours, on the other side of the dirt road. A simple little house, whitewashed, with a little iron gate painted blue. Mr. Patterson's house. My father had always spoken badly of Mr. Patterson since I was a child. He said he was a dangerous gossip, a bad man, envious, who lived snooping into other people's lives. He said I should never talk to him, should never even look at him, that people like that were dangerous. Because of those words, I spent my whole life avoiding that neighbor, crossing to the other side of the street when I saw him on the sidewalk, lowering my head if he waved from afar. I was afraid of him, a fear planted in me by my own father, cultivated by years of lies. But at that moment, my dear ones, I had no choice, no other. It was his house or certain death. It was trusting a man I thought was an enemy, or dying there in the street, alone, bleeding, with my body splitting in half. There was no middle ground, no other option. I crossed the street. I don't know how I managed. I honestly don't know. My legs no longer obeyed me properly, my feet dragged in the dirt, kicking up dust. I was leaving a trail on the ground, a dark red trail of blood and strange liquid flowing from inside me. My vision came and went, darkening at the edges, as if I were entering and leaving a tunnel. I held my belly with both hands, squeezing with all my strength, feeling life escaping through my fingers with each second. I reached Mr. Patterson's gate, that little iron gate painted faded blue with some flower decorations on top that his late wife had commissioned. I remember every detail, my dear ones, as if it were a photograph stuck in my mind. I lifted my hand to knock, to call for help, but I had no strength. My arm fell. My knees gave way like they were made of water. I fell right there, in front of the blue gate, face down on the cracked cement sidewalk, unable to move any more, unable to speak, unable to do anything else. The world darkened around me, slowly, like when you put out a lamp. The sounds became distant, muffled. The last thought I had before everything disappeared was, at least I died trying. At least I died free outside that room. At least that. But God, my dear ones, the good God I thought had abandoned me, had other plans for this daughter of his. I don't know how long I lay unconscious on that sidewalk, my dear ones. It could have been minutes, could have been longer. What I know is that at some point, in the middle of that darkness that had swallowed me, I started hearing a voice, a man's voice, hoarse, worried, calling for me. "Girl! Girl, for the love of God! What happened to you?" I tried to open my eyes, but my eyelids weighed tons. I felt hands touching me, big, calloused hands, but gentle. Hands that didn't hurt, that didn't squeeze with malice, hands that trembled with worry. I managed to open my eyes just a crack and saw Mr. Patterson's face very close to mine. A wrinkled face of a man already advanced in years, with brown eyes full of astonishment and pity. "Jesus Christ Almighty, what did they do to this girl?" he murmured, more to himself than to me. "Hold on tight, girl. Hold on tight. I'm going to get you out of here." I wanted to speak, wanted to explain, wanted to ask for help with words. But from my mouth only came a weak moan, the sound of a wounded animal. Mr. Patterson didn't wait for any explanation. He looked at my enormous belly, at the blood still flowing, at the deplorable state I was in, and understood there was no time for questions. He picked me up, my dear ones. A man who must have been over 60 years old, with a thin body bent by time, picked me up with a strength I don't know where it came from. God's strength it must have been. He carried me to his car, an old cream-colored Volkswagen Beetle parked in front of the house. He laid me in the back seat with all the care in the world, as if I were made of glass. I remember the smell of that car, of old leather and pipe tobacco. A smell that to this day brings me a feeling of safety, however strange that may seem. "Hold on, girl. For the love of God, hold on," he repeated while walking around the car and getting in the front seat. "I'm taking you to the hospital. You're not going to die. You hear me? You're not going to die." The trip to the hospital was a blur in my memory. I went in and out of consciousness, sometimes hearing the sound of the Beatles' engine, sometimes diving back into darkness. I remember hearing Mr. Patterson praying out loud while he drove, one Our Father after another, one Hail Mary after another. I remember feeling the car shaking on the dirt road, each pothole sending a stab of pain through my open belly. I remember thinking that if I died there, at least I'd die being cared for, being treated like a person, and not like a circus animal. When we arrived at the Asheville hospital, Mr. Patterson got out of the car shouting for help. I heard voices, running footsteps, doors slamming. I felt hands taking me out of the car, placing me on a hard gurney, bright lights passing over me as they pushed me down a hallway. And then, nothing more. I passed out completely. I woke up I don't know how many hours later, in a white room that smelled of alcohol and disinfectant. The first thing I felt was a different pain, a pain of clean cut, no longer that tearing pain. I looked down and saw my belly was bandaged, covered in white gauze, stained with a little blood. But it was smaller, much, much smaller. It felt like they had removed a weight from inside me, a weight I'd been carrying for too long. A nurse entered the room, and when she saw I was awake, she ran out to call the doctor. Minutes later, a man in a white coat entered. It was Dr. Henderson, the surgeon who had done my operation. He had a serious, tired face with deep dark circles. He pulled up a chair and sat beside my bed, looking at me with a mixture of sadness and anger I didn't understand at first. "Young lady," he began, his voice firm but gentle, "do you know what we took out of you?" I shook my head no, my heart racing with fear. I was afraid to hear, but I needed to know. The doctor took a deep breath before continuing. "You weren't pregnant. I mean, you were pregnant a long time ago, but the baby died early on. What happened after was something rare, very rare. The baby's body calcified inside you. Turned to stone, so to speak. Medicine calls this lithopedion." I kept looking at him without really understanding. "Stone? What do you mean, stone?" he continued, choosing his words carefully. "Someone was giving you very dangerous substances, young lady. Substances that made your body continue producing fluid, continue growing around this calcified body. You were carrying 33 pounds of tumor, cyst, and rotten fluid inside you. If you had waited one more day, the infection would have spread through your blood and you would have died. You got here by a miracle. 33 pounds. 2 years carrying 33 pounds of death inside me, thinking it was a life. 2 years being poisoned by my own father, being used as a circus attraction, having my body destroyed by greed and evil. Tears started running down my face, silent, warm. Dr. Henderson held my hand. "Young lady, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Who did this to you?" And then, my dear ones, I told everything. For the first time in my life, I opened my mouth and let out all the truth that had been trapped inside me for years. I told about my father, about what he'd been doing to me since I was 19, about the pregnancy, about the bitter tea, about the visits from men who paid to see me. I told about my mother who knew everything and never did anything. I told crying, trembling, choking on the words, but I told. The doctor listened to everything in silence, his face getting paler and paler, his fists getting more and more clenched. When I finished, he got up without saying anything and left the room. I stayed there, alone, thinking he'd left disgusted, that nobody was going to believe me, that I'd have to go back to that house. But he didn't leave. He went to call the police. That same night, 2 police officers came to the hospital to take my statement. Mr. Patterson was also there, waiting in the waiting room since he'd brought me. He served as a witness, said he'd always suspected something wrong with the coming and going of men at my father's house, that he heard strange noises sometimes, but never had proof of anything until I appeared bleeding at his gate. I should have done something before, Mr. Patterson told the police, his voice choked with guilt. I saw there was something wrong in that house, but Eugene was a violent man, dangerous. I was afraid. God forgive me, I was afraid. That same night, my father was arrested. The police went to the house and found him sleeping, drunk, not knowing anything about what had happened. They also found the bottles with the substances he was giving me, hidden in a kitchen cupboard. They found the money from the visits stored in a can under his bed. They found my mother, still drugged, who when she woke up and learned what was happening, didn't say a word in defense of her husband or in her own defense. She stayed silent, the same silence as always. My father was charged with false imprisonment, abuse against me, and attempted murder for the poisoning that almost killed me. The trial happened months later, when I was already recovering. He was convicted, my dear ones, sentenced to many years in prison. I didn't go to the trial, didn't have the courage to look at his face again. But I heard he shouted the whole time that it was a lie, that I was an ungrateful daughter, that he had never done anything wrong. Nobody believed him. In prison, news of what he'd done spread among the other inmates. 2 years after the conviction, they found my father dead in a cell. The other prisoners had discovered what he'd done to his own daughter and made justice their own way. I felt nothing when I found out, my dear ones. Not joy, not sadness, not relief. Just a huge emptiness, an emptiness that took years to start being filled. My mother was prosecuted for negligence and failure to provide assistance. She wasn't arrested but lost any rights over me. Not that it mattered. I was already of legal age. She went back to the empty house, alone, and lived there until she died, about 15 years later. I never spoke to her again. I tried, in the beginning. I tried to understand, tried to forgive, but every time I looked at her, I saw the woman who heard my screams and did nothing. I couldn't, my dear ones. That I couldn't do. And Mr. Patterson, that man my father said all his life was dangerous and bad, he visited me in the hospital every single day while I recovered. He brought fruit, magazines, words of comfort. When I was discharged and had nowhere to go, it was he who took me into his house, gave me a clean and safe room, treated me as if I were family. The man I spent my whole life avoiding out of fear was the angel God placed in my path to save me. Life has those ironies, my dear ones. Sometimes the enemy we learn to hate is precisely the one who will extend a hand when we need it most. And here I am, my dear ones, 52 years after that September afternoon that changed my life forever. 74 years old, living here in this same Asheville where I was born, where I suffered, but where I was also reborn from the ashes like a phoenix, as my oldest granddaughter, who likes those fantasy stories, says. The life I have today, my children, is a simple life. I don't have a mansion. I don't have a new car. I don't have a fat bank account. But I have peace. And after everything I went through, peace is the greatest wealth that exists in this world. I live in a little 3-room house here in the Montford neighborhood, very close to the church where I go every Sunday to thank God for being alive. The house is humble, but it's mine. I bought it with the money I saved selling my jams and baked goods at the farmer's market for decades. Each brick, each tile, each piece of this house represents a batch of preserves, a jar of apple butter, a tray of biscuits. It's the house my work built, and therefore it has a value that no money can measure. After I left the hospital in 1972, Mr. Patterson took me into his house as if I were his own daughter. That man my father taught me to hate became the father figure I never had. He gave me a room, gave me food, gave me protection. More than that, he gave me my dignity back. He never treated me as pitiful, never looked at me with pity or disgust. He treated me like a person, like a human being, like a strong woman who had survived hell. It was at Mr. Patterson's house that I met Mrs. Wilson, his neighbor on the left side. A widowed woman, an excellent baker, who sold pastries at the Saturday market since she'd been alone. She saw in me a soul needing purpose and invited me to help her in the kitchen. "Come here, girl," she said. "I'm going to teach you to turn sugar into sustenance and pain into sweetness." And she really did. She taught me to make apple butter at the right consistency, preserves that don't crystallize, shortbread that melts in your mouth. She taught me that working with your hands heals the soul, that each stir of the spoon is a prayer, that we can create good things even after having lived through bad things. I worked with Mrs. Wilson for almost 10 years until she got too old to continue. When she died in 1983, she left me as inheritance her recipes, the copper pot that was her mother's, and her market clientele. "Continue my work, Margaret," she asked on her deathbed, holding my hand. "Don't let these recipes die." And I didn't, my dear ones. To this day, every Saturday morning, I set up my stand at the Asheville Farmers Market and sell the jams and baked goods she taught me to make. People already know me, already know that Grandma Maggie has the best preserves in town. Mr. Patterson lived to be 89 years old. He died in his sleep, peacefully, in 1999. I took care of him in his final years, when age weighed heavy and he couldn't do things alone anymore. It was my turn to give back everything he did for me. At his funeral, I cried as if I'd lost my own father. Actually, no, I cried more. Because he was more of a father to me in 27 years than Eugene was in a lifetime. I got married, you know. In 1978, 6 years after everything. I met George at the farmer's market itself. He was the son of a vendor who sold vegetables. A good man, quiet, hard-working, who didn't care about my past when I told him. "What's past is past," he said. "What matters is what we're going to build from here on." We were married for 40 years, until he passed in 2018. I miss him every day, the coffee he made in the morning, the way he called me Maggie, his snoring that kept me company at night. With George, I had 3 children, Marcus, Regina, and Lucy. All 3 were born healthy, grew up strong, studied, made their lives. Marcus is a truck driver, always traveling around America. Regina is a teacher here in Asheville, teaches at the same school where I studied when I was a girl. Lucy went to Charlotte, works at a hospital. She's a nurse. I'm proud of all 3, a pride that fills my chest and makes everything worthwhile. And the grandchildren, my dear ones, the grandchildren are the joy of my old age. I have 7 of different ages scattered around, but almost every Sunday they show up here at home, the kids running through the yard, fighting over pieces of cake, calling me Grandma Maggie with those little voices. The house gets full of noise, laughter, life. And I sit in my rocking chair, watching that scene, thanking God for having given me strength to cross the street that September afternoon. The scar on my belly is still there, my children. A thick, whitish line that cuts across my abdomen from top to bottom. For a long time I was ashamed of it, hid it, didn't let anyone see. But today I look at it with different eyes. It's not a mark of shame. It's a mark of survival. It's proof that I was stronger than the monster who tried to destroy me. Every time I look at this scar, I remember that I won. My routine today is simple and happy. I wake up early, make my coffee with milk, take care of my little plants in the window. I spend the morning in the kitchen preparing jams for the market, listening to the radio, humming along to the country songs that play. In the afternoon, sometimes I receive visits from neighbors to chat. Sometimes I go to church to pray the rosary. Sometimes I just stay on the porch watching the street movement. At night, I have dinner early, watch my shows, and sleep with the clear conscience of someone who did the best they could with the life they had. And it's here, in this kitchen, smelling of apple butter, that I share my story with you. My dear ones, who stayed with me until here, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for having listened to this difficult story. I know it wasn't easy to hear, just as it wasn't easy to live. But I needed to tell it, because maybe somewhere in this big world there's someone who needs to hear it. If you're living in a house that feels like a prison, if the person who should protect you is precisely the one who hurts you, I want you to know, it's not your fault. It never was. The monster is the one who chooses to be a monster, and you're just the victim of their evil. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. I learned that silence is the abuser's greatest ally. My mother stayed silent her whole life, and that silence almost killed me. But I also stayed silent for a long time, out of fear, out of shame, thinking nobody would believe me. When I finally opened my mouth and told the truth to Dr. Henderson in that hospital, it was like a weight of 1,000 pounds lifted from my shoulders. The truth sets you free, my children. Even when it hurts, even when it's scary, the truth sets you free. I also learned that help sometimes comes from where we least expect it. My father spent years teaching me to hate Mr. Patterson, and it was precisely he who saved my life. So if you're suffering in silence, look around. There might be an angel in disguise very close to you, someone you can't even imagine could help. A neighbor, a teacher, a coworker, a stranger on the street. Don't be ashamed to ask for help. Asking for help isn't weakness, it's the greatest proof of strength that exists. I crossed that street bleeding, thinking I was going to die. But I crossed. And that's the message I want to leave. Cross. Even with fear, even with pain, even thinking you won't make it. Take the first step, the second will come, and the third. And when you least expect it, you'll be on the other side, free, alive, ready to start over. It took me a long time to understand that surviving isn't just not dying. Surviving is choosing to really live after the nightmare ends. It's making apple butter on a Tuesday afternoon. It's seeing grandchildren running through the yard. It's looking at the scar in the mirror and feeling pride instead of shame. Surviving is transforming pain into story, and story into hope for those who are still in the middle of the hurricane. If you know someone going through a similar situation, don't stay silent. Silence kills. Extend your hand, offer help, report to the authorities. In every country in the world, there are people ready to help those who suffer abuse. Search, ask, don't give up. A life may depend on it. Now I want to ask something special from you. Tell me here in the comments what time it is where you are now that the video is ending. Did you watch it in the morning with your coffee? Was it after lunch in that nice lazy time? Or is it already evening there? And from what corner of America or the world did you listen to me today? I read every comment, you know? Each one of them. And I imagine you there, in your homes, setting aside some time of your day to listen to this grandma's stories. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button below and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next stories. And if this video touched your heart, send it to someone you think needs to hear it. Sometimes a story can change a person's life, can give strength to someone who needs it. Let's spread this kindness around the world, okay? May God bless each one of you, take care of your families, protect you from all evil, and always remember what this grandma said. While there's life, there's hope. You deserve to live, my children. You deserve to be happy. A kiss to each of your hearts. Until the next story.